So today what we have for our large group meeting is a panel. And I don't really have a title for it other than interesting things to think about for stuff you do after college, I guess. Maybe we'll make it more specific. For education and degrees that you might pursue after college. Okay, so we have 4 people with us today who all have different backgrounds, but they are actually all pursuing doctorate degrees of some kind. And as you know, in UBRP, we don't want to pigeonhole you into doing anything in particular, but we do want to inform you about things that you can do to get to where you might want to go. So that's why we're having the panel today. So starting from this side, this is Ben Rivera. He's a UBRP alum, and he just finished his master's here at the U of A in Physiological Sciences, and he just recently got accepted to medical school at Loma Linda School of Medicine, so that's where he's going next. So I'm going to give you like a short breakdown of everybody, and then I'll have them talk more about their experiences, and then we'll basically do like Q&A. Okay? So that's Ben. Julie, some of you may know Julie because she's also your small group leader, but Julie Huynh is an MD PhD student here at the U of A. She actually finished her master's in MCV through the Accelerated Master's Program before she entered the MD PhD program, but she's a UBRP alumna as well. And then we have Elizabeth Joes. She's a PhD student here in MCV. She just finished the ABBS program, and she can talk more about what that is when we get to it. But she actually finished 2 masters before doing her PhD, and she's worked out in the private sector as well. And her masters are in microbiology and nanochemistry. And last but definitely not least, we have Brian Blais. He is a PhD student here in natural resources. He's also a Carson scholar. And he did his master's in integrative genomics, I believe. Yes. So lots of different subjects, lots of different things. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you guys as panelists to do is maybe take 5 or 6 minutes or so and talk about what you're doing, but maybe more importantly, how you came to decide to do what you're doing. So that way we can learn a little bit more about what it is like to be a grad, doctorate, master's, fill-in-the-blank student, and how you came to make that decision. And then we'll open up for Q&A. All right. So Ben, you first.
Sounds good. Hello, I'm Ben. And like Jen said, I just finished a master's in physiology, but the way I got there was a little strange. And so my original plan was to do an accelerated master's in environmental science because I was in UBRP too, and that's what my research lab was in. And I had already spent a lot of time in the lab, so I wanted to stick with that. But as I got to the end of undergrad, it became clear that my work was nowhere near where it needed to be for an accelerated master's. I was also kind of feeling burnt out with all the classes I was taking and with all the extracurriculars I was doing to try to be competitive for medical school. And so my PI suggested, why don't you take the time and do a full 2-year master's? And the way she framed it for me was like, if you have a typical 30-year career in medicine, what's an extra 2 or 3 years before you start? And she was absolutely right. I applied for graduate school, and it was one of the best decisions I made. And so I decided to do physiology for a couple reasons. The first reason was that my bachelor's was in physiology, so it was just a much better fit. I understood the science, physiology just clicked for me. And the second reason was that if you're selected for a TA position in the Physiological Sciences master's degree, you're going to be TA in the undergraduate anatomy classes. That pays for the degree, and you get a small stipend to live off of, which is very nice. Nobody wants to accrue more debt, right? And so that's how I got into physiology. As for what it was like, grad school was an adjustment. The first year, I only had to take 1 class each semester, but they were both 5 or 6 credits. And so I was in class every day, and then every 3 or 4 weeks I had a 3-hour written exam, right? No more multiple choice. And then besides that, I was learning how to teach the 2 lab sections of anatomy and physiology, but the department helps you out. They have a weekly teaching workshop to give you skills and tips, and then you have a weekly TA meeting where they go over exactly what you need to teach to the students. And then besides that, I was doing lab rotation and trying to learn everything I could, try to generate as much data as I could. So it got a little hectic sometimes. You really have to learn how to be disciplined and schedule your time so that you're efficient with your work. But second year was a lot easier. You're done with class, all you have to do is work in lab and teach. And so when I was in lab, I was just trying to generate as much data as I could. You also have to do a seminar in front of the department, so present everything you've done on your research so far. And then you have to submit a master's thesis or research manuscript. It's okay if it's not finished, to a master's committee. and then defend it. Let me see. Overall, I had a lot of fun. I mean, it was a lot of different things, but it kind of keeps things interesting that you're not just doing the same kind of work the whole way through. I really liked graduate school. I'm glad I went because I think it gave me a lot more confidence, not just confidence teaching and presenting information, but also confidence in making decisions. Because when you're in grad school, your PI doesn't really look at you as a student, but more of a colleague. So I was in charge of my project. My PI would help me with experimental design and maybe new ideas, but it was up to me to troubleshoot. It was up to me to talk to people to see what had to get done. It was up to me to seek out new methods, figure out what to buy, what we needed. And so it made, grad school makes you very independent. And, yeah, so one thing I would advise you to do if you're looking into grad school is make sure you find a lab with a good PI, somebody who puts their students first, because that makes all the difference. And let me see, now I'm trying to finish my master's thesis work. It's very close to publication. So I'm going to finish the last pieces of data that I need this summer, submit it for publication, and then start medical school in August. So yeah, let me know later on if you have any questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie, and as Jen said, I'm at the MD-PhD program here. So I just finished my first 2 years of med school, and I am in my first year, I guess finishing the first year of grad school now. Honestly, when I started undergrad, I didn't even know research was a career option. I'm a first-generation college student, so I had no idea that all the stuff that we were learning about in high school in their science textbooks was like acquired through research like this. But I was fortunate enough to meet a really amazing mentor my freshman year of undergrad, Johnny Ferris in MCV. And so I started working in his lab. And that was what really opened the doors to so many things. Like Ben said, one of the most important things you can do is find a mentor that really supports all of your goals, including research, but opening new avenues in all fields that you want to go into. Because while I fell in love with research from working in his lab, he knew I had always wondered if medicine would have been right too. So he actually really encouraged me to seek out doctors to shadow, and it was through a postdoc that was working in our lab at the time that introduced me to a geneticist here at the University of Arizona. And so I shadowed her and worked with her a lot. And it was really the combination of two of them that made me want to pursue an MD PhD, because I really want to run my own lab. I love asking and answering questions about science, but I also love seeing patients. So a typical MD PhD career is usually about like 75% in the lab and then 25% in the clinic. And so those two were really my inspiration into getting into doing the MD PhD program. Other things that I've done, if anyone has any questions, is I was really into science communication. So I worked at Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered in between undergrad and med school, so around the time I was doing my master's. And so that was a hereditary breast cancer nonprofit where I was a staff writer, and I also was the science editor for the Daily Wildcat here. And so I guess my whole career trajectory has really just been follow your heart, as cheesy as that sounds. If you just do what you want to do and what you like to do, everything just kind of works itself out.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. So I'm doing my first year, almost finished my first year of PhD, and I've just joined the MCB department, and I actually work with Julie in the same lab. I have a very weird story as to how I got here. I was very interested in biology as a kid, and so I wanted to, learn about DNA and RNA, and it looked like totally jazzed me, and I'm like, I want to do this. And so I did my undergrad in biotechnology, and like when I did that, I had this really great research experience, and when I was doing it, I came across some mentors who were like the best, and so I was like, do I really want to do research, or do I just want to just go out and work? So after I finished my undergrad, I was very much in the dilemma, should I do a master's or not, but I thought let's just give it a shot and do a master's. And it was a good experience. I learned a lot in terms of being able to think scientifically and apply myself, but I still didn't feel it was enough. I just was like, okay, I've learned something, but I really can't apply it in terms of actually sitting in the lab and, you know, thinking through experiments and like being able to troubleshoot. And so I thought I'd go and work for some time. And so I worked for 2 years as a research technician. And that really like changed me in terms of like being able to really troubleshoot like experiments on my own, you know, really talk with my PI and being able to figure out stuff and being able to apply myself. And I think after 2 years of, you know, working as a research technician really trained me for a PhD. And that's when I like applied for a PhD and you know, got the UFA. I think the best advice I could give you is really look for a PI who works well for you. I think, as they said, it's so important because I've had bad experiences where having a PI that you just don't gel with does not like, it will really discourage you. And so go do something, be with somebody, doesn't matter like how famous he is or how good he is, like in terms of, but you should gel well with him. You should be able to tell him your goals and he should be listening to you in terms of what you are saying, he or she. So I think that's the best advice if you really want to pursue a PhD or even a master's degree with a thesis. It's something to think about.
Hi guys, I'm Brian. So I grew up chasing frogs in swampy places in England, and that passion is just sort of carried over, and I followed that through. So I did like a general biology program for my undergrad, and when I finished that, I wanted nothing to do with grad school. I wanted some time off, and I ended up working for 3 or 4 years as like a wildlife technician for various agencies. Was doing different wildlife management and conservation jobs, just getting a ton of experience that way. And then I think it was in my 3rd year or 3rd different position doing that, I was a technician for a PhD student. And I started to like observe what that person was doing and how they were doing things. And I started to get the itch. Like I got curious about grad school. And I started looking it up. And as my colleagues here have said, it does take a lot to try to find the right PI, the right advisor. My advice is to think about like what interests you, what kinds of things you like, what research questions you like, and then just go on Google. Like find out who's doing what, and make a list of different professors who are doing similar things and just reach out. And I definitely agree where you need like, I think finding the PI is probably the most important thing if you decide to go to grad school. Just finding someone that you gel with, that it feels right. If you can, try to meet that person. If not, just an email and phone calls and stuff like that. So I think I reached out, or at least I looked into about 20 different professors before I narrowed it down and found the one that was going to work out for me for my master's, which I did in genomics, but I was working in sort of a mix between genomics and ecology. Great experience all around, really sort of learn different ways of thinking. And it's not just the education aspects, it's also the opportunities to meet people, to learn about yourself and how you work, to design your own research questions. You're not just having to follow directions, but you are in charge of designing where you want to go. And the advisor is sort of there to keep you from veering off the road and to cut the red tape. And by that I mean they help you if you got to apply for research permits and things of that nature. But for the most part, they kind of let you go and do your own thing. So I did my master's separately at a different place. I did it in South Dakota with Black Hills. And then I came here, and my current research, I've taken a little bit of a different step away from genetics and genomics. I'm more into wildlife management and conservation. So my research kind of bridges the gap between field biology and zoo-based conservation. So I look at species reintroduction programs. I look at natural history, such as spatial ecology of species, especially how far they might wander from water, and I kind of tie those two things in. And specifically, I do a lot of my research with garter snakes. So they make really good models to kind of address the questions I'm looking into. And so I work locally with the Phoenix Zoo on species reintroduction programs, but also some natural patterns that I go out to the field and work on. So I'm in the middle of the road with my PhD. I'm in year 3 out of year 10,000 right now. I'm about halfway done. I think I have some general pointers I jotted down, but I think what we'll do is just turn it over to you guys, and if there's anything that we missed in our discussion, then we could address them.
Okay, so now you know these guys a little bit better. And we bring in people like this occasionally so that you guys can ask questions about anything these guys have been through. So, questions? Yeah?
Yeah, can you guys talk about one of your greatest struggles?
Great. So the question is, so I'm going to reiterate the question just because we're filming. But yeah, the question is, what were your greatest struggles? No, any order is fine. Take your best.
When you think you're doing everything right for an experiment, but it just refuses to work. For sure. But yeah, as far as overcoming that, just going back to the literature, trying to find people who are knowledgeable about that experiment. I've emailed people in other countries, and they've responded back to me. So yeah, try everything. Don't give up right away.
Yeah, I guess on that note, we're talking experiments. I think of like 100 experiments that you do, you might get one that works out. So I think persistence is probably key. I remember there was like an experiment I really needed to get done for the paper we were publishing, and like it required picking, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 C. elegans worms, and that just takes a really long time. And you had to do it in the dark because the little Pseudomocytes, you could only see them if they were fluorescing. So I would just be sitting in a dark room for like 6 hours a day, just picking these, and it just wouldn't work. And I think I did this for like 3 weeks, but I don't know. If you just care about something enough, you just grow that persistence and you just get through it. And I guess another struggle would be, it's probably a little more specific, but I think coming from my background, a lot of my family never really understood exactly what I was doing, especially since this one's kind of an interesting, very long, unique career. So I think just learning how to communicate, what you're doing and all of that with people that you're close to.
I think for me, it's been like dealing with the stress. It can really get to you, with school and, being in a research lab. And there's a lot of expectation when you become a grad student. They, expect you to know things and to be able to perform to some level. And I think just, having to deal with that. And I think it's really good to have a good support system, like friends and family who are there and understand, like, what you're going through and be able to support you through that. So just finding a way, like an outlet, like some kind of hobby, something to, de-stress is very important. So I think that was one of my struggles to get over.
I think it's kind of a ritual for all grad students to feel overwhelmed and have no idea what they're doing. But that's actually pretty normal. And when you sort of look back, it's not as bad. So you always got to sort of try to stay calm and stay focused. And these guys had great advice. And I would say the same thing. Find some me time for when you need to de-stress if you're feeling like that. But also that you're never alone. You're going to have colleagues, whether they're in your lab or cross labs. You're going to have your advisor and research scientist, the people that you can go to and talk to, sort of work itself out.
Another question. Yeah.
So I guess this is more specific to the two people that are in med school or that apply to med school. Do you have any tips as far as studying for the MCAT that you study by yourself or in a class setting, like a program?
So the question was, it's specific to med school for people that are studying for the MCAT, what advice they have. But if you don't mind, I think I can expand that. I mean, generally for grad school, you have the GREs. And so I'm going to rephrase it as for entrance exams, for things that you have to do afterwards. What advice do you have? You want me to go the other way here? Let's start this way. Go around.
All right, I could offer advice on the GRE. Granted, I took it about 10 years ago, and I think they changed the format. It sucks. It's a lot like the SAT from high school, so don't just walk into it. Do try to do some of the study guides. There's a bunch of free sources. If you want, you can buy some of the books or some of the tutorials and so forth. But you should know that it's not really a great way to assess your working ability or to assess how someone's going to work. And the advisors you're going to be looking to know this. I know some schools are really fussy about, a certain score. Other schools just want to know whether you've taken it or not, and some schools, they don't even require it. But know that, don't stress too much about it. Study and work hard and try to do good for yourself. But know that, the professor, the advisor is probably going to be looking for other things than a GRE score.
Yeah, I think I agree 100% with that. I mean, I can just talk about GRE, but I mean, for me, I spent some time, I really put effort into studying for it because I wanted to, do well and get into a good school. I took it like 5 years back too, but it's a good experience, but don't worry about your score. If you work hard, you're just going to get a good score and it'll be fine. Mostly, I think, especially when to get into UFA, I did contact professors. I wrote to them saying I'm interested in their work, and it was a good, they look at many other things apart from your GRE score, but do your best and it'll be fine.
So I took the new MCAT, but I guess for you guys it's just the MCAT. This changed what was it, 3 years ago? And so I think I took it the second or third month that it had changed, and so there weren't a lot of prep books available for it, but I think AMCAS had offered their their question banks, and especially after taking boards last year, I will say the best way to study for anything is, well, one, before this, just do well in your classes right now, because if you learn the foundation now, you will do much better on the test. Because instead of having to relearn physics, you can just do practice questions, because that's really the key. I think with all tests that you're going to take from the MCAT to all of the STEP licensing exams, it's really all questions. I used UWorld exclusively last year to learn all of my stuff, and that's just a huge question bank that you do to prep for that. So I would say do well in your classes now, learn it now, don't just do it to get the A, do it and actually learn the material, and then hone it and actually learn it by doing as many practice questions as you can. Because I would get the books or stuff like that, just if you need to brush up on stuff, but you really should be learning the majority of your classes and just using that as a refresher.
I second what Julie said. Yeah, definitely do the best you can in your classes for the foundation. But by far, what helped me the most was doing tons of practice questions. And then another good piece of advice I've heard is to dedicate a small chunk of time just to focus on prepping for the MCAT or GRE, 1 month and 2 months, and just knock it out. I started prepping for the MCAT during my first year of grad school because I thought I would have a ton of time to study. I didn't. And so the class I was taking helped out with the biology portion, but it was rough. If you do have to take class while you're studying for the MCAT, I recommend just doing a little bit every day. Don't try to knock out tons of pages all at once, because you'll just discourage yourself.
Yeah, so on that, I was actually supposed to take the old MCAT, but it's because I really only gave myself I think 3 or 4 months to do it, and I was doing my master's also at the same time, so it's really not, if you're going to do it, it's totally doable while you're taking classes, just give yourself a wider range of time to prep for it. Yeah, because a lot of people will do the summer, where they just do 2 months of serious studying.
So I will take a moment to divulge in my previous academic advisor days to tell you a horror story. So I had a student once who was pre-med, studied for the MCAT, did all the right things. And the day he took the MCAT, he got food poisoning. Whatever he ate for breakfast just didn't do it. He went to a restaurant, ate something, went to the MCAT and got food poisoning, and had to leave the exam, which meant it was invalidated, and there were no other test dates that he could take it. So he had to wait an entire year to retake it and reapply to medical school. And so, I mean, we laugh about it now, obviously, because he did fine, he passed, he got it, and life is great. But there are times that we talk, and he's like, oh my gosh, that was so horrible. And he's like, but sometimes that's what life throws your way. And he said, actually, you know, I learned a lot in that extra year that I took off. So I guess the moral of the story is like, don't eat anything weird. If you're going to take the MCAT or the GRE or anything else important on that day. Okay, it does happen. What other questions? There must be one more. Yes.
This is more for Julie. What would you think are the fundamentals to communicating science successfully? Because you said you had experience working in science communication.
So that's an interesting question. So what's like the fundamentals of communicating science well?
Effectively.
And I mean, am I phrasing it correctly? Okay. And I mean, all of you can contribute, but the question is primarily for Julie, so I'll start with you.
So I feel like it takes me a while to pick up on stuff sometimes. Like I think I'm kind of a slow learner, but I think that actually really helps with communicating science, because in terms of just communicating things that you, like something as technically heavy as science, where most people, you know, if you don't stay in science, the last science class you take is pretty much in high school. So I think just really boiling it down to the basics that people can understand, which really is not a lot of science. So I think you just have to get really good at figuring out how, like analogies are really good. Just doing stuff like that, getting it down to a level that everyone can really understand, because we do a lot of technical stuff and it's really cool to us, and you know, we can talk about like lysosomes or westerns and stuff like that all day, but at the end of the day, most people do not find that enjoyable, so you have to do it in a way that they will enjoy. If you want to practice, writing is great. You'll have to like write a press release here, which is a really good thing to do, but I seriously recommend like, you know, maybe trying to write for the Wildcat and stuff like that, just because writing is a really nice way to be able to think clearly, to see how you want to explain things.
Yeah, that was all really good advice. I second all that. You sort of want to know your audience too. Like, you guys could probably understand some of the jargon if I start to talk about ecology or general biology stuff. But if you're sitting down with like, you know, a family dinner or something like that, and they have no idea what you're doing, you got to kind of like adjust a little bit. So general advice is to try to get away from like jargon terms and just try to talk broad without talking down either. And communication is not just verbal. It can be through writing samples, blogs, social media, video, a variety of different sources, radio. And just knowing your audience and being able to tell a relatable story. The more visual of a story, the better it is received across professionals and novices alike.
And some of you have done this already, but it's an opportunity that we have through UBRP. UBRP has a collaboration with KXCI Community Radio, so we actually have a radio show every Thursday. Every week we have one undergraduate, usually from UBRP, but sometimes from other places, that talks about their work. And you sort of have this challenge to do it in layman's terms and without jargon, and to do it clearly and not from a script. And it sounds very intimidating, but it's actually quite fun, because it's just like talking to, you know, someone you just met about what you do. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, you can email me and we can try to schedule you on the calendar if you want to try it. It's a lot of fun. It is. And it's edited, it's not live. So if you say something like totally wrong, they'll just wipe it out and then it's perfect. Yes?
So I have a question about your guys' decision to go into medical school right after completing a master's program. Did that benefit you getting into medical school in any way?
That's an interesting question. So the question is, for the two folks that are in their medical program or starting to attend, did the master's help them in any way? And from an admission standpoint, that's hard to say for us, but I mean, for you guys, you may have comments about how you think it might have helped.
Yeah, I think with some of the classes that they have you take in graduate school, certain they're all a little bit different, but some medical schools really want you to take genetics, and others really want you to take some kind of psychology, so when they see those more advanced sciences on your transcript, it's a bonus. The medical school I'm attending wouldn't clear my financial aid until I had showed them that I had finished my master's degree, so I definitely think they were looking for it. Trying to think about what else I could add. During the interviews, just during the teaching, during the public speaking, really helped me to be better at articulating my thoughts. So I think it helped me interview better as well. Practicing talking with my PI and other professors and things like that.
I definitely did the master's because I really wanted to pursue a career in research, but in terms of just, I think, from a purely like medical school admission standpoint, I think that skills that you acquire during your master's are like very, very important because you'll go to conferences, you'll have to talk, you have to, again, like become very persistent in doing stuff, like you just learn, never to give up and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think the skills that you get from doing the master's is very important, but whether like that makes a huge deal in admissions, I think you should just do it if you want to do it because you'll shine in your interviews if it's something that you're passionate about and helped you grow as a person. Because I know for U of A, the average age of my class was probably about 24, 25, so a lot of kids took time off to, some did a master's, some scribed, some worked at the NIH post-bac program. Actually, one of the people that I was close to was a professional horseback rider for like 5 years before she started med school. So it's just really like whatever you do after and before med school, you really just want to make sure it's something that you're really passionate about because people will be able to see if you just did it purely just to do it versus, oh, I really want to get a master's in nanochemistry, what was it? Because it was something that you were interested in.
I would just say that that's all applicable to beyond the medical field too. Sound advice.
Another question? Yes. Yes.
Was finding a PI for you guys easy or was it like a trudge?
Interesting question. So was finding a PI easy or was it a trudge, particularly article? How do you like to say?
I would rank that task as number one, finding the right PI. For my master's, I said this earlier, I think I made a list of like 20 to 30 potential people, and I emailed a bunch. Some never got back to me. That's just how it goes. They're busy, they lose track of emails. Some got back with short responses. Some got back with more detailed responses, and you have a little back and forth, sort of feeling it out to see if it's going to work. And then for me, one really worked out. There was a lot of communication. We had similar ideas. So it's just kind of like finding that relationship and seeing how you feel. And it's okay to ask any kinds of questions too, like how they work, how they're going to treat you. It's okay to ask because you kind of want to find a balance between a micromanager and someone who's completely absent, right? And then the same thing's going to apply whether you're going into master's degrees, whether you're going into straight to PhD program, or even after a master's and into a med school or a PhD program.
So I think, so I've worked in multiple labs before I actually started my PhD, and so I had an idea of what kind of PI I really wanted. I think it's good to think about it, like what works for you and make a list of things that you really want from your PI. It was very difficult for me to choose, the PI that I'm right now with because I had great options, and before I moved to U of A, I had actually written to certain PIs, and they were like, yeah, come and rotate with us. And you have to realize one thing is that when you're communicating on email or face-to-face, it may not be the actual thing. Like doing a rotation and actually working with them is going to tell you how they work. And so I think it's very important to, when you're doing your rotation, to notice little things about the PI, how they work, whether they are either pushing you, how much you want them to push you, is it too much for you? Can you survive with the stress in the lab? Do you like the people in the lab? It's very important to take all these things into consideration and then make your decision. And finally, I would say go with something that makes you happy, because I think you really need to be happy in the place that you are in. You cannot be in a lab fully stressed and like totally disgusted with the people around you and do a PhD, because it's 5 years of your life and it takes a lot. So think about that, like whether your PI is listening to you. You know, I actually went to each of the PIs I rotated with and like told them like, this is what I expect. Can you give it this to me? And we had a really open conversation, and they were very open to listening to my thoughts. And so be very clear with what you want before you actually join the lab, so that they know what you want, and you know you're getting what the lab you get in is the right one for you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's said so far. I think some other tips would be definitely ask around. So ask students in the lab, but ask other people how they feel about that, because you actually do get a pretty good feel from talking to other people. Usually they're pretty honest, and that can help you make a decision, because I know for my PI, I was actually planning on working with someone else before I had started here, but then she moved. And so I didn't know what to do, and so I just asked around a lot of people, and the PI that I'm currently with, Andrew Pig, like everyone loved him. He actually did his PhD here, and I've never heard so many people like rave about Carson before, and then I did a rotation with him, and you know, it worked out really well. I liked everyone in the lab. So yeah, I would suggest talking to people too, in addition to feeling it out, because it is definitely important how well you work with the PI, but also the environment. So if you like the other people in the lab, if things, if it works well for you. And I think the other advice I'd have in terms of picking a PI, or at least would just emphasize, is I do know people who really don't want to ever see their PIs. Like, they are very independent. They just, want to see them once a month to show them, like, okay, here's my data. And then, personally for me, I do like more of a constant communication. So that is something that I would make sure to figure out when you're rotating, especially if you're choosing a PhD lab, because it's important for your master's. But when you're doing a PhD, it's really a new type of stress. I don't know how to describe it, because you've gone from just being someone who acquires knowledge to like generating your own. So it's an interesting new thing that most of us have never done. So you do want to make sure that you have someone that you can work well with.
Yeah, I agree completely with everything you all said. I found my current PI through a good friend of mine who was working in this lab. He spoke very highly of him and said, hey, I'm leaving, do you want to take over? And started rotating, and I loved it, so I just stayed there the whole time through my master's. If you're in a situation where you're visiting another graduate school, right, and you don't have a chance to do a rotation, talk to the people in the lab, and don't ask them, oh, is the PI terrible, but ask them questions like, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses, like probing questions.
Another question. Yes.
So it was said that in grad school, it's a lot more independent, like you're kind of figuring out what you want to do and when you want to do it. How do you guys each find work-life balance in a situation where you sort of set your own pace?
Good question. So how do you find work-life balance in a situation where you're setting your own pace as a graduate student? Ready? Okay, thanks.
All right, so who's a morning person? Okay, and who's a night person? Or you guys, cool. So it doesn't matter. So you find out when you work the best. If you're a morning person, you work really well. Focus on your research then. If you're a night person, do the opposite. And when you know that there's a period where you're just dull, lag, your brain is dead, don't bother trying to push through the research. Take that opportunity to do whatever you need to do in your personal life, whether it's simple things like doing laundry, or if you need to go run errands, do things like that. I think just finding when you work best, trying to squeeze your research and what you need to do in that time frame, and then let the other remaining time periods open to just do the other things. That would be my advice.
So I try to keep like one day of the week where I just don't do any studying or any research, and like I really work hard the rest of the week to make that one day available, and like I go out, like hike, meet friends, and try to de-stress. And it's not always possible, but I really try to make that possible. And if you work hard during the week, you can like make it work. So if you have a good PI and he's like totally, you do you, whenever you want to come in, you can work, and like you can work at 10 in the night, or you can work at 7 in the morning, then it's all up to you to just schedule your day. I find it easy to make a list of things that I need to get done in this week, and I try to get it done by then, and then have a day off. So
Yeah, I think like I said, finding like the time that works best for you really is important. So I'm a morning person, so I usually try to start my day at 7, and then I try to finish by 5 or 6 with whatever it is. And so I have my nights free. I'll do 6 days a week. I do try to take a day off too. But I think also just knowing that there are going to be periods of time when you are going to have no life. I did boards last year, so that was like 10 hours a day of studying at least. I just did orals, and that was also a very rough period of time in my life. So I think for those times, don't follow your schedule, do whatever it takes to like get through. But in general, I think figuring out a schedule that works for you now is important, and making sure to balance that. Because what I also like to do is travel, and I always make sure that, okay, like scheduling that in, whether it's just a close trip like nearby in California somewhere, or going somewhere to visit a friend, I always make sure to not just work all the time, because you're going to burn out, and it is also your life, and you should definitely make time for things that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, you guys are taking all my things that I was going to say. But yeah, definitely block out time to sleep, right? Block out time to take care of yourself, make food, do laundry, chores around the house. There's always going to be work to do in lab. It's never going to be finished. And so my general advice is prioritize the stuff that has an imminent deadline or an immediate deadline, like an abstract, data that you need for a presentation or a conference, things like that.
And I mean, this is not from a grad school standpoint, but having been a middle school science teacher previously, and that's what I did right after I graduated, I think my best advice to you on that is set your boundaries and try to stick to them. I mean, that was sort of mentioned, but I know for me, being a school teacher, I mean, there's always things that you could do. There's always like ways that your brain is running. But I always told myself, like, I'm only going to go to work and work at work. And when I go home, I'm going to let home be home. And so, I mean, that meant when I was teaching that I would get to school at 6:30 every morning, and I would leave every day at like 5:30. But when I left, I was like, I'm not grading, I'm not doing nothing. I'm just hanging out, watching movies, doing whatever. And it made for a really happy home life. So keep that in mind too.